Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wines video. You would have heard about estate bottled wine, or if you've ever paid close attention to a label on a bottle of French wine, you would have come across the phrase Mise en Bouteille au Château or Mise en Bouteille au Domaine, and that's for wine bottled at the winery in France, in this case, whether that's a Chateau or a Domaine. We obviously easily understand what it means, but do you actually know why it matters? Or maybe the right question, as we will see, is why it came to matter. To understand wine, or the world of wine more generally as it is today, it's actually really something interesting to think about for a minute, as it takes us back to the history of wine and winemaking and tells us something about how we see and appreciate wine today. So let's have a little journey around why this estate bottled concept mattered and matters. Let's go. My fellow wine-loving friends, Julian here. Before we get started with the video, there is something that you have to know about. This video was made possible by the Bonheur Private Wine Partnership, and the reason I work with them is not just because it's been called the most unique wine club in America, but because they truly love the wines that they choose for you. Founded by Will Bonner, the partnership is a small group of wine lovers who have come together to import excellent small batch wines that might otherwise get completely overlooked by large importers. They get them. Right now you can get your hands on 3 rare extreme altitude red wines from Argentina, from some of the purest, highest vineyards in the entire world, way up in the Andes Mountains. No middlemen, no additive packed supermarket wines here, no inflated costs. Plus you'll get exclusive access to more wine education videos from me, just like the one you're about to watch, to make sure you become an educated wine connoisseur. So make sure to check out the link in the video description to see if you want to become partner in something truly special in the world of wine. But for now, back to your video. And let's start with a couple of facts that we don't think about nowadays as wine consumers when we buy a bottle of wine, but concepts that are very important nonetheless in the history of wine. First, the glass bottle as we know it today is an invention of the 19th century in Europe, or at least it only became possible to manufacture enough glass bottles to consider bottling significant amounts of wine with the Industrial Revolution. Before that, glass blowers how to melt the silica and blow the bottles one by hand, which obviously was very expensive, and so wine wasn't bottled this way. Therefore, as our second important point, wine used to be shipped around the world, sometimes in bulk, either in amphorae or later in wood barrels. As a consumer, you had to go to the wine merchant with your jar or whatever container and fill it up to take it home. This matters to our story for 2 reasons. One, it was harder to preserve the genuine characteristics of the original wine from the property this way, as wine would spoil and oxidize faster in large containers than it does in a bottle of wine. You couldn't really get the taste in England, for example, let alone in the United States, for what the wine would truly have tasted like in Bordeaux, for example. And maybe that's why Thomas Jefferson used to like going to Bordeaux, quite possibly when you think about it, right? Secondly, this was at a time when merchants often blended different wines from many different properties. They got barrels from different chateaus and mixed them or sell them anonymously. Essentially, there was hardly any way to know what you were buying. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Spanish, Italian or else. You had to trust the wine merchants, and they weren't necessarily all that trustworthy at the time, right? It took about a whole 100 years or more for this to change, and it started mainly in the region of Bordeaux, France, because they were making some of the most reputable wines in the world at the time. Some top estates started bottling parts of their wine at the Chateau under their own name, but only parts of their wine, not all of their wine. Notable in history are Chateau Lafite Rothschild and Chateau d'Yquem, which are often referenced as being amongst the first ones to do this. So essentially the chateaus started branding their names themselves, especially after the famous 1855 classification that highlighted some of them as being some of the very best wines in the world. So the chateaus made better profit, and the lucky customers who could get their hands on these bottles had a better guarantee of the provenance and the quality of the wine. But this didn't really take off, or took a very long time to catch on, because virtually all vineyards in Bordeaux were destroyed by phylloxera bug, which is a little bug that attacks the roots of the vines. This was in the middle of the 19th century, so virtually no more wine was made in Bordeaux. Then came World War I, then the Great Depression, then World War II. I mean, you know the story. Now, Chateau Mouton Rothschild, which is owned by a different branch of the Rothschild family than the one who owns Lafite Rothschild that I mentioned just a minute ago, Chateau Mouton Rothschild is often acknowledged as being the leading chateau that bottled all of its harvest themselves somewhere in the 1920s, as in 1924. This started convincing the other top Bordeaux estates to follow suit and bottle all of their wines themselves. But because of the turmoil of history, it didn't really take off again, and it only became a reality after World War II, which is really when vast numbers of wine producers, in France in particular, started bottling their wines at the estate itself, and then all across Europe. And of course this came along with the indications of origin, the protected appellations, firmer controls from governments over frauds, and so on, all of those things that we have today. This all happened then. So how and why does all of this matter? Well, it's only been about 40 to 50 years, if that the majority of wine producers bottle their own wine at the estate itself. What we take for granted now of being able to taste the difference, oh yeah, and I can taste the difference between a Bordeaux wine versus a wine from Tuscany, Italy, versus Rioja in Spain, Napa Valley versus Sonoma, or the Barossa Valley in Australia, or even taste the difference between one producer and their next door winery, their next door wine growing neighbor. It hasn't been like this for that long, in fact, at least. If you consider the history of wine, well, it's very, very small. It hasn't been very, very long. Top estates from Bordeaux, Champagne and Burgundy have been doing this for a little while, maybe a century or so, but now even modest wineries can bottle their own wine, and if their wine is good enough, raise their profile. More power to the winery, more power to the consumer. We all have gained from all this better transparency. And truly I think that's a big part of what makes the beauty in the world of wine in general. You can taste the soil, you can taste the grapes, you can taste the passion that's been infused by the winemakers into the wine, and even more importantly, you can taste and trust the story that a wine tells you when you read about it, when I talk about it here with these videos, when you put it eventually in your mouth. You can all feel the genuine story behind it. Think about it, how many food products or beverages can you do this with? Identify the difference between two makers, two different terroirs? Not many at all, especially on a product that remains relatively affordable, generally speaking. All of this has been made possible by the glass bottle and by the founding mention of Mise en Bouteille au Château and the associated fundamental concept of estate bottled. It took about 150 years, but this is what shifted the world of wine from a commodity of an anonymous agricultural product that turned into a bottle of wine that represents a producer, a wine grower, a brand, a story, a terroir, a territory, all of this. This is also why us at Bonner Private Wines Club, we like to bring you not only good wines, but also the genuine stories that come with them and are behind the wines. Now there are still some wines that are still shipped in bulk, not ours of course, but some are, including wines shipped internationally and bottled in the US or in the UK, for example, while they came from Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, all around the world. Many supermarket chains do that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially today with technology and traceability, etc. But it's just not quite the same thing. It doesn't come with the genuine taste of the place and the seal from the producer. This is why I wanted to highlight this simple mention of estate bottle that seems obvious today, but it carries in itself a whole story, a whole history with it. One of the key phrases in the constitution of the world of wine, if you wish. And I'll leave it here for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon next week in the wonderful world of the Bonne Private Wines partnership in the wonderful world of wine. Au revoir.